Hi, this is Ofoy Murray, the digital reader. Today I'm going to be talking about the books I read in the month of February. I had a great month. I got through 6 books, and basically the way I pick my books is I use this app I love called Bookshelf. And what I do is basically I kind of put all the books that I want to read for the year in Bookshelf. And then if I buy a book that I really like and I want to read immediately, I'll of course add that to Bookshelf. But if I finish a book and I don't really have anything specific that I want to read next, then Bookshelf will actually, you can like tap a button and Bookshelf will actually randomly choose a book from the ones that you put in your TBR for the year, and it'll just randomly pick one and say, boom, move on to this one. Obviously, you don't have to choose that one if you don't like it, but if you're not sure, it's a really cool way to kind of just dive into what you want next. For me, over the last couple months, for January and February, I've really been trying to focus on seeing if there's some detective or mystery books that I'm into. So I went with one of the classics of the most classic, which is The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. Wasn't a fan of it. I just felt that he was not terribly likable. The characters were kind of one-dimensional, and the mystery wasn't really a mystery. I feel kind of bad because this book is a classic, but I feel like it's a classic because it inspired a whole generation of detective noir type books. And I just feel like in the 90 years since this came out, the detective noir genre has grown so much and people have just gotten so much better. For example, a perfect example would be something like the Dresden Files, which is urban fantasy detective noir, which, has a huge following. So I'm not going to totally, I am going to say I didn't like the book, but I also feel that Raymond Chandler wrote this book, and I give him props because back then there wasn't TV, there wasn't YouTube. In my life now, I find that for the most part, women are the readers. And when I say that, what I mean is that when I commuted to work for 25 years and I would be on the train or I'd be on the bus, the people who would be whipping out books every day and just diving into them were the females. I feel like he kind of wrote the book back in the time where everybody read. They read magazines, they read books, they read papers. Everybody read because the other entertainments were kind of sparse, or hard to access regularly. But if you bought a book, that gave you days and days and days of entertainment. And because of that, I kind of feel like this is the train that runs behind my house. You're going to hear it for a minute, and then after that, I'm going to keep on keeping on. So back to The Big Sleep. I also kind of felt like he wrote this book kind of at a level that anybody could read it. I mean, it kind of feels like it was written, it's an adult themed book, but it kind of feels like it was written like at an 8th or 9th grade reading level. I mean, some of the sentences are put together pretty basically, but all that to be said, this was a book that came out, when it came out, and it was the beginnings of a genre, and I give it respect for that. I just can't say I was entertained that much by the book. And because of that, when I look at this book, I kind of give it 2 stars. It wasn't the worst book in the world, but I'm good on Raymond Chandler. I am curious to see what other people during this time were writing, but Raymond Chandler, I'm good on. A Conspiracy in Belgravia. I love this book. I read the first book, A Study in Scarlet Women, which is becoming up next. And I read them both. I've read them almost literally back to back. And that's mainly because, as a matter of fact, I'll do this first. I read A Study in Scarlet Women, and I definitely liked the book. Um, I didn't give it 4 stars mainly because it was kind of an origin story, and because of that, they just really didn't get they the writer, rightfully so, spent a good deal of time fleshing out the characters that she would be talking about in the rest of the book series. So it just was a little bit slower paced, and there's one of the characters who I'm not a big fan of, and she spent a lot of time with him in the first book because he was integral to building up some other things. But I knew from reading the first book that I wanted to read the rest of this series, and that once they kind of got this origin and initial character development out the way, I would thoroughly enjoy it. So I did give that book 3 stars when I read it. A Conspiracy in Belgravia, back to that. I love this book. This book, they got all the setup out the way, and then you just dove into her and her character. And the reason I like this book so much is not only is her character cool, but her character is classic Sherlock Holmes, of course. But the other characters are just, all have real distinct personalities. You know, they have the detective who's kind of just like an old school chauvinist of the time. He's not very progressive, but he's a person of honor. They have her sister, who is just kind of like the cerebral side of Watson. And then they actually have Watson, who is just this cool older lady. I don't want to blow it all, because just finding out when you're reading Sherlock fiction or fan fiction or whatever you want to call it, part of the fun is reading it to find out how they retold a story, what characters are playing what roles, how they've reinvented them in different ways. So anyway, all that to be said, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Probably the best book I've read since I started. One of the best books I've read since I started going through all this. And I have to be honest, I want to give it 4 stars, but I just enjoyed it, so I'm going to give it 5. Chester Himes' Rage in Harlem. This was a good book. I enjoyed it. I felt like the characters may not have been terribly fleshed out, but their interactions were top notch. I just really loved the interactions. I really loved how he painted this world of the world of Harlem, and especially when he introduced the character. One of the coolest things he does is when he introduces a character, he doesn't so much tell you who the character is. He tells you a story about the character that lets you know what kind of character this character is, So that part was really good. But I felt like the world, although interesting, was a little bit fuzzy. He really didn't spend a ton of time trying to flesh out Harlem. I almost feel like he's like, look, you know what Harlem is. Let me go ahead and talk to this story. I just feel like his stuff was primarily about the interactions between the characters. The story and the mystery were okay. So I would say for me this was a good book. I will probably at some point read the other books in the series, but I'm not really driven to read the other books in the series. I'll do it because it was a good book, and it would have to be between other books I'm driven to read. So I give that 3 stars. Alice in Wonderland, did not like it. I gave it 2 stars mainly because, and once again, I'm not holding it against Alice in Wonderland, but this is a book that is written to be read to children at bedtime. I don't really feel it's a book that's meant to be read on its own, just reading it by itself for the story, because there really is no story. It's just a drugged up dream of a 7 or 8-year-old child, and some of the prose is a little bit witty, but I just really just kept reading this book waiting for something interesting to happen, and nothing interesting happened. Luckily though, the book is terribly short. I believe the book is like 69 pages or something. And even given that, it almost took me a week to read it just because it was just a slog for me. Because there was just nothing going on in the book except descriptions and really that's it, just a whole bunch of descriptions. So I was not a fan, but this is definitely a book I would read to your child like a bedtime story or something if that child was a precocious, smart child. And last book I read was Confessions of a D-List Supervillain. I really, really enjoyed this book. This book gave me all of the stuff I needed as a nerdy guy who reads superhero fiction. It isn't a deep social, political, economic, and psychological, look into what it is to be a superhero. I mean, to be honest, if you want that, you read the Wild Card books. The Wild Card books are a series of superhero fiction books, and they kind of get it. They kind of get deep. But this was good fun, and I am a person who loves good, pulpy fun. And this is basically about kind of like a nerdy, antisocial supervillain who's basically a supervillain mainly because he's kind of antisocial and anti-establishment more than evil. And hijinks ensue in which he ends up helping a superheroine, and things happen during that in that interaction that kind of turn him into a begrudging hero, but really not so much a begrudging hero, but somebody who's trying to protect Earth, and he's trying to protect Earth because heck, he lives there too. But the whole story, the action, the interactions, and his character, if you are kind of a nerdy guy who lacks some self-confidence, this character really will resonate with you. And that's me, and it resonated with me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Right away I bought the second book, but it's a 4-star book for me. I wasn't I wasn't like just giggling like a little schoolgirl. When I was reading the Sherlock Holmes books, I was just like, yeah, that's so cool. I was just giggling a lot when I read those. So those are the books that I read in February. Who knows what I'm going to read next month? This is Ofori, the digital reader, and keep reading, y'all.